Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Hope everybody is rolling into the webinar. It is 2 o'clock. We'll wait just a couple of seconds here and let a few folks get logged in. I can see some people are joining. All right, let's go ahead and get started, folks. First of all, it's my pleasure to welcome you guys to our webinar this afternoon entitled Quality Measurement, using scoring methods within Therap to better assess overall quality. We really appreciate you guys joining in with us this afternoon to talk a little bit about how you can better use ISP programs and data, and particularly the scoring methods within those modules to better assess quality for the individuals you support. And then we're going to kind of take that to the next level and talk about the impact of detailed ISP scoring methods on the use of Therap's data-driven outcomes module to assess organizational quality in facilitating outcomes for the people that you support. So just to provide a little bit of context for the webinar this afternoon, well, first of all, let me take a step back for a second. I should introduce myself before I jump into this. Just to let you guys know who you've got talking to you. My name is Jason Laws. For those of you that I don't know, I do business development for Therap in the Southeast. I work out of Athens, Georgia, and work with a lot of our states down here. But the other hat that I wear within Therap is on the development team for Therap's business intelligence platform for high-level data aggregation across your organization. And specifically, I work directly with the data-driven outcome team to kind of pull together this module to help you guys do better organizational assessment of outcome attainment and that kind of thing, and really build upon the individualized service data that you have for the people that you support. I am joined on the call this afternoon by Ms. Fayon Johnson. Fayon is one of our senior implementation specialists with Therap. She's been with us quite a while and no doubt worked with a lot of you guys as you were getting up and running with the system. And so she's here to help me kind of moderate the webinar this afternoon, as well as to provide her insight as a member of our data-driven outcomes implementation team. Fayon is one of our DDO specialists, along with Shay Dotson, who many of you know as well. And I think Shay, I heard her join the call. She's going to be on the background today, but she's with us as well. These ladies work directly with our providers, providing basically consultative assistance with maximizing the value of DDO, helping you guys implement it within your organizations and structure the data collection in a way that is meaningful and helpful in really being able to facilitate the outcomes for the people that you support. So that's who we have with us today. Just some basic housekeeping that any of you guys that have been on our webinars before are familiar with, but those that may be new, you are all on mute right now simply because we have quite a lot of people. I think we have 86 folks on board right now and going up. So we want to keep everybody muted to keep down the ambient noise, but we do have a mechanism for you guys to communicate with us throughout the webinar. There is a chat feature over on your GoToWebinar panel. There is also a questionnaire section where you can go in and enter questions. Right now, Faye and Shay are both going to be monitoring that and keeping an eye out for questions and answering them. And if you ask questions that we think may have a lot of relevance for everybody that's on the call, they're going to give me a heads up, and then we will try to discuss them broadly and talk about how that can affect everyone. So again, as I was getting ready to say a moment ago, to provide a little bit of context for, hang on just a second, there we go, to provide a little context for why we're talking about this and really kind of place this particular webinar within the series of webinars we've been doing over the last several weeks, is that within Therap, as many of you guys know, we've been around a long time now. Many of you guys have been users for a long time, and we've been very focused on the capturing of information, capturing the information around the services that you're providing, the individuals you support, and we do it in a lot of different ways through your service tracking, incident reporting, health data, and many, many, many other modules. But we've really put a focus of late on getting beyond just the capturing of data and really getting to the utilization of that data to assess the services that you're providing and really assess the overall impact on the people you're supporting so that you can constantly improve upon what you do. And so while today We're largely going to be talking about a subject that I imagine many of you guys are pretty familiar with. ISP programs and data, and particularly the scoring methods within them, is something that's been available for a long time within Therap, and no doubt many of you have great familiarity with it. We really want to focus maybe not so much today on the mechanics of using scoring methods, but really on thinking about how we're using them and making sure we're creating them in a way that is useful to help us get beyond, as I said, that compliance mindset and really get towards overall assessment of the services that we provide. So the outline for the webinar is going to be, we're going to start out with just a review of basic scoring methods. Again, I'm sure many of you guys know these things inside and out, but there very well may be a couple of folks on the call that haven't had an opportunity to use this piece, so I am going to go over some of the basics very quickly, what they are and what they do. We're going to talk about a few examples of scoring methods and how they can be used to assess things for the people you support, and then really talk a little about the benefits of more detailed scoring methods, getting beyond just the compliance version of yes, I did this, or no, I didn't, or yes, this individual participated, or no, they didn't, and talk a little bit more about how having a more detailed scoring method can have a lot of benefit when it comes to assessing overall progress for those individuals. Now, once I've gone through that, I'm going to turn over the second half of the presentation to Fayon, and she's really going to take kind of that as a jumping off point and take it up to the next level and talk about how scoring methods impact the utilization of our data-driven outcomes module. Again, hopefully many of you guys have been on our series of webinars around DDO, and so you kind of know what we're talking about there. But for those that may not have, DDO really takes the ISP data that you're collecting on individuals and allows you to aggregate it at an organizational level, so that not only can you see how individuals are progressing, you can look at kind of the overall agency's success in facilitating particular outcomes and do that kind of broad scale quality assurance activity to really make sure that you're having that across the board impact on the people that you support. So that's kind of the general outline for this. And as I said, as we go through, please share your thoughts through the chat and questionnaire functions, and we will address those as we go through. So to start it off with the basics of this, ISP data collection and scoring methods, what are we talking about here? Well, ISP data is basically our foundational service documentation tool within Therap. I've got a quick screenshot up here that many of you guys have seen before around how you can set this up to track particular goals, particular outcomes, and then specifically you can create scoring methods within your ISP program and data collection to really identify things like an individual's level of assistance needed to meet a goal, whether or not an outcome is present in their life, those kinds of things. So you have a ton of flexibility with how you create your drop-down methods to really capture what's going on in the lives of the individuals you support and their progress towards their particular goals and outcomes that they're working on. Now, why is this so important? Again, you know, a lot of us have been doing goal tracking and that type of data collection for a really long time, and we're used to doing it, frankly, because we have to. And so again, we're trying to get beyond that and really focus on maximizing the value of that data. And to that end, I like to pull this slide up because I think it really helps illustrate just how powerful this information can be for all of our organizations out there and for all of the individuals that we're supporting. These are the stats that we pull out of Therap every month to identify just how much people are using different parts of the system. And as you can see, this is absolutely one of our most high volume modules. We, every single month, are collecting over 9 million pieces of ISP data throughout our users across the country. And if you add all that up, we've got nearly 500 million, with a B, pieces of ISP data within our system. And so when you have that great a volume of things, you really want to make sure that you're structuring in a way that maximizes its value, so that we can take that 500 million data points and use it to assess what's going on in the lives of the people that we support. So part of the way that we do that at the individual level is we're able to take the data that's collected through those ISP programs and data and then pull it into a lot of individual-based reports. We have what we refer to as a programmatic report, which gives us a percentage count out of what of how often particular scores are used so that we can assess an individual's progress over time. We can take those reports and look at them in a tabular format or graphical format, and they really provide nice tools for assessing an individual's progress. We also have a clinician report that's a little more narrative in nature that allows us to get more supplemental information about those scores. And then we also have checklists where we're able to quickly go in and see a month's worth of data and to make sure that data is getting collected and what the particular scores are. So again, all of these things are things you guys are likely pretty familiar with, but let's step back over to the application itself and talk about some of these scoring methods and some ways that they're used and perhaps some ways that we can use them even better. So let me go ahead and log in to one of our demo accounts here. And okay, so our ISP programs and data are located on the individual tab within our dashboard, as most of the individualized documentation that we have are. So you see ISP data here and ISP programs here. Also, for many of you, you're probably used to accessing this through your to-do list. But our ISP data shows up here, and it allows me to go in and track day-to-day data. So what I'm going to do is go pull up a couple of quick examples of what an ISP program and a scoring method look like. So I'm going to select Bailey here, and Bailey has quite a few templates for ISP data collection in our demo account, but the one I'm going to pull up is one that's focused on the residential supports that she gets through the waiver. And so Bailey's been identified, she's a waiver recipient in North Carolina in this demo account, and so we structured this in a way to capture detailed data about the goals that Bailey is working on around meal preparation, completing various chores around her home, and budgeting money. So a lot of independent living skills. And so what we're able to do is go in and assess what level of support that Bailey needs to be able to meet those goals. And by collecting this on a day-to-day basis and saving that information, running reports on it, we can see over time her skill development going forward. So that's just a single example of how this can work. To show you another example of how these scoring methods can work is I'm going to take a little different template in here and show you that not only can we use scoring methods to assess things like goal progress, we can also use it to assess things like personal care assistance. What type of assistance did this individual need to complete certain tasks? So with this one, you can see I don't have as much supplemental and narrative information, but I can go in and document what level of support an individual may need with particular types of personal care. So with these drop downs, you have a ton of flexibility with how you use them. And so again, getting to our broader theme this afternoon, what we want to focus on is making sure we're setting up those scoring methods in a way that really maximizes the value of the data. So what I'm going to do now is show you a single ISP program that I've created, and I'm going to show you 3 different scoring methods that I've set up there, and talk a little bit about how they add value to what it is that we're tracking. So if I go in here, and I'm working with Robert. Well, Robert has some community activities that he likes to participate in, and I've set this up to track it in 3 different ways. So I'm going to start with an approach that many of us have taken for a long time. So I'm tracking here. If I go to Robert's ISP program, I can enter my beginning and my end time, and we see that Robert likes to plan and participate in community activities and invite friends along with him. Well, for a long time, a lot of us were really just tracking, did this happen or did it not? And so we're using scoring methods that say things like yes or no, or completed or not completed, that kind of thing. And while that certainly has value to see if Robert's participating in these activities, there's not a lot of depth to the information there. So when I run a report on this, there might be a lot of reasons that Robert didn't do this today, and there might be a lot of reasons that Robert did. There might be various levels of support Robert needed to be able to participate in this kind of stuff. But with a very simplified scoring method like this, I can't really tell what those are. So rather than just having a yes or no option, I can also set this up to have more of a level of independence. So now I've set this one up with the exact same goal, but instead of just looking at yes or no, I now have a drop-down menu that shows me the level of support that Robert needs to be able to participate in these activities. So I've got a little more value in my data than a simple yes or no, but what I don't have is what is typical for Robert? Does he typically participate in these things independently, or does he typically need a little more support in order to engage in these kinds of things? And so I don't have that there. So maybe what I want to do is to provide even more detail in my scoring method so that I'm not only tracking his level of independence, but I'm assessing that towards kind of what our goals are for Robert. So this final one that I'm going to pull up is even more detailed than the last. I've got the same task, but now I've got his level of independence and whether or not that meets the goal that we're looking for Robert based on what we have in his service plan, based on his identified needs and skill development. So as you can see, with those three options for scoring methods, we can really kind of gradually ramp up what we're then able to do with the data. So if I use a much more detailed scoring method like this, I'll now be able to run reports within Therap and get very detailed in terms of, let me go in and pull one up with a detailed scoring method here. We're going to go back to Bailey because I know she has one. I can go in and run a report on that data. And I'm going to run a programmatic, which is a percentage-based report. I'm going to run this data for the entire year to this point. Obviously, you can go in and select whatever time parameters work for you and what you're looking for. I can also decide how I want to chunk my data between days, weeks, months. I'm going to break it up by quarter. And I'm going to look at not only his percentages, but how often did we work on this, which we refer to as the trial count. When I go in and pull this up, now rather than just seeing how many times Robert participated in this activity or didn't, I can look at each of his, or excuse me, I'm looking at Bailey now. I can look at each of Bailey's goals. I can see how often she needed certain levels of support. I can see how often she actually met the goal as written. And I can also compare that data to the baseline that we have within the system so that I can see Bailey's baseline data on meal preparation. We were hoping she would be at 83% or better. She's actually at 100, so she's well above her baseline. So I can look at this data in tabular format to see Bailey's progress over time. I can aggregate that data for the entire year to this point and see how often we've worked on it. Or I can also take all of this data and drop it into a more graphical format if I want to have a better visual in terms of showing Bailey's progress here. So we have bar graphs. We also have line graphs in here that really give us a nice visual of someone's progress. But again, being able to get these good graphs in here are dependent on having a drop-down menu that allows for multiple choices and really allows us to give some depth to the data that we're collecting. So one last thing that I want to go over before I turn it over and we talk a little bit about how this drifts over into the DDO side is for those of you that may not have used a lot of ISP programs and ISP data to this point, I want to pull up a draft of a goal checklist that I've created here and talk about some of the options that we have in the system for scoring labels and show how you guys can create your own customized ones. So you can see this one is set up with a very basic scoring method of yes or no. And as we've discussed, that may be useful in terms of compliance purposes, but it's not giving us a lot of depth to our data. So I can go in and change the scoring method. And when I go in to change it, I'm met with a lot of different options. Several of them are default options that we have within the Therap system, like the level of independence the individual had with completing it, whether or not they completed the goal, partially completed it, or completed it completely. We have the ability to go in and do counts within this if you're trying to track something a little more numerically. And then we also have an option to go in and create your own customized scoring methods. And these scoring methods that you see here are customized ones that have been created within this demo account. Now, if you pull this up and you don't see an option that you like, and there's a particular scoring method that you want to use for this individual in this ISP program, you also have the ability to define a new one right here at the bottom. So let's say I'm working just on outcome attainment, and I want to see whether or not an individual attained this particular outcome. I can select how many options I want, and I can name this, or let me call it present outcomes. And so I want my drop-down menu to be outcome present, and I can give it an acronym. I want outcome partially present. and I can go in and say outcome not present. I can also throw in a not addressed because perhaps we didn't work on this goal today, and I don't want that to throw off the data that we're collecting on those days that we do. So I can go in and add an NA and make that non-reportable so that when a staff selects that particular score, it's not aggregated with the rest because we didn't work on this particular goal and assess this particular outcome today. So you can be as creative as you want, up to 20 different options with your drop down. You can continue and save that and apply it. If you want to create your own scoring methods that you can then apply to all of the ISP programs that you create, you can do that on the administrator side. If you have administrative privileges to do that, you can go in and create a scoring method here. And when you create a scoring method here, you will then have the ability to apply it to any and all of the ISP programs that you create throughout the system to maximize the value of the data. So again, that's a pretty quick run through of how ISP programs and data and scoring methods work. Again, I'm sure many of you guys have been using these things in this way for a long time. But again, what we're really trying to emphasize is using very detailed scoring methods and creative scoring methods to allow you to get a lot of depth out of your data and really increase the value of the reports that you can do out of it. So what I am going to do now is hand over the rest of the presentation to my colleague, Fayon. You go in here and make Fayon the presenter. And what Fayon's going to do is, as I said, kind of take this to the next step. Fayon is going to show you how to take this data and apply it to our data-driven outcomes module within the business intelligence platform and show you how creative scoring methods on your ISP programs can be mapped over to assess much broader outcomes for the entire organization. So Faye, the floor is yours.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. As Jason said, my name is Fayon Johnson, and I'm going to be talking about how the ISP programs tie into DDO. But before I jump into some of the DDO things, there were a couple of outstanding questions as part of Jason's presentation that I want to sort of just go back and address. One of the questions that we got that I think is really important to address and to discuss out loud is that as you guys are watching this and you're seeing new ideas and examples of how you might incorporate this in your current processes, it's important to note that you cannot just go back into an active ISP program and overwrite the existing scoring method. In order to make those updates or changes, you will need to go in and discontinue and copy your ISP program in order to do that. So if you guys are fairly new or you haven't gotten started and you're not sure what that looks like, what you're doing is searching for that existing ISP program in your system. And then once you've found that, so here's one, you're able to go down to the bottom of the ISP program. There's also a link at the top that says click here, but generally folks are clicking on show dynamic document. And once you do that, you'll see that while you can make some edits to certain parts of the ISP program, the scoring method is not one of them. So to change it, you'll have to go down to the bottom and click either discontinue and copy as a draft to stop this particular version, dead in its tracks. Or if you want to be able to work on your second version before it's approved and still leave your current one active, you would instead go ahead and do a copy and you can make those edits there. I know that folks are wondering, is that a change or is that something that we can fix? But the idea is with the documentation that you can change, it's not affecting your outcomes. It's not affecting your results. And ideally, you're just going in here and fixing a typo or adding some clarifying text. With a scoring method, if you were to overwrite the options, the data that was previously created might not match up word for word. Essentially, it would skew your results. So anytime you want to change or update your ISP program within an active, your scoring method within an active ISP program, you're going to need to go in and discontinue and copy that. That was the first question. The second question that came up when we were looking at the report and some of the additional detail that's offered by adding those extra drop downs to your scoring method was, how do I add a baseline for my individual to the system? And there are actually two ways that you can add baselines to your ISP programs. The first is by adding a baseline date range. This is generally used when this is a fairly new outcome for the individual. We don't know sort of where they are or what their level of ability is, and we want the system to tell us how that person has done, and in addition to telling us how they've done, use that information as the basis going forward to compare, are they making progress or not making progress. In that type of scenario, you're going to tell the system your date range. So you can use a month, 6 weeks, whatever is typical for your agency. And what happens is any data that's collected by your staff during the date range that you've indicated here is going to be analyzed and determined to be that person's baseline. Moving forward, that percentage or whatever was accomplished during that time frame is what the system is going to use and calculate the deviations from the baseline moving forward. The second option that you have is to tell the system what the baseline is. This can also be used if you have sort of a target or a milestone that you want your individual to hit. For example, you want them to be at 80% and you want to see how far they are from that. Are they meeting it? Are they not? So what happens is when you are adding your tasks, or if it's an existing ISB program where you're copying it, when you're editing your tasks, you have the option below the task description to enter a baseline score for each scoring method option that you have. Okay, so you can come in here and you can say, for example, we want this person to be independent 75% of the time. Or if we know that that's where this person is, then that's the number that we want to enter. No matter how you split this up, your value across all of your scoring method options must equal 100. You don't necessarily have to have a value for each one. So for example, I might say I want them to be independent 75% of the time, and I want them to need monitoring 25% of the time or less. Because these two values equal 100, I don't need to add any additional fields here. Or I can choose to break those values up across all of my ISB programs. Anyone have any questions about that baseline information or updating scoring methods before we dive into the DDO half of the training? I think we're good there. All right. So Jason, you went over a lot of what I was going to talk about, which is excellent. It means that, we're on the same page. We're on the same page. We're getting the same information out there. The big takeaway for today's training for you guys is to understand that whenever possible, you want to move as much detail as you can into your scoring methods, especially for those of you who are using DDO. When you have a basic sort of yes/no scoring method, in addition to not getting a ton of detail, if you're having your staff put that information in the narrative, there are a couple of things that are happening here. The narrative information isn't moving into DDO. So you're not able to see and sort of analyze that there, at least on an aggregate level. You would have to run that clinician's report to be able to read those narratives and then sort of determine where this person is as far as making and meeting their goals. The other thing when you're, encouraging or allowing your staff to put more or the bulk of the information in the narrative is how detailed that response might be. The quality of the information that is included in those narratives is probably as varied as the staff that you have. Some of them are on top of it. They'll give you tons of detail and you know exactly where this person is and what they're doing. And others, you can barely get to put 3 words in there. When you've got the bulk of that information in your scoring method and you have a detailed and descriptive task, then you've got everything you need and it doesn't require a ton of effort from your staff. It makes it easier to get in and out of the system as well. So Jason showed a couple of examples of how you might do detailed scoring methods, and I had created some as well in the demo account that I was working on. So I'll show those really quickly, and I'll also show some examples of how you might sort of break away from goals and start to use detailed scoring method to capture things like drills or behavior, and how that all ties into DDO. So as he mentioned before, you have the ability to create those custom scoring methods for a unique individual or to create them in the system so that they become sort of default options for everyone. I like to call them master scoring methods, and they appear here. And here's the list of some that we have. Now, one thing that I always encourage folks to include, regardless of whatever the actual details of your captions say, is a response for tracking refusals. Because what happens a lot of times when we don't have an option to track refusals, staff will indicate no, or they'll select sort of a negative response from the choices in the dropdown. And that's not necessarily indicative of where the individual is or what they've done, but because they don't have something to indicate that they didn't want to do this or that they refused, a lot of times we are negatively skewing our data. So I always strongly recommend, whenever possible, having an option for refused, and also making sure that you have some sort of verbiage to indicate that this particular objective was either not scheduled, it wasn't due for this day, or the individual wasn't present. And the reason why I always bring this up, because the response that I generally get from folks is, well, we don't document if they're not there for that day, or we don't necessarily document if we didn't run that goal that day. If you have your ISP programs broken up into specific subject areas, for example, you have one for hand washing, and you have one for laundry, and you have one for finance, but your finance goal is only run on Tuesdays and Thursdays, you're usually okay, because we can see that data was collected on in the other programs that the individual has on those dates. But for those of you who have combined scoring ISP programs where you may be addressing several areas on a single form, it's important to indicate when it wasn't scheduled. So again, we're not negatively skewing the data, but also to make it really easy to identify when I see blanks in my report, is that because my staff didn't document versus the individual wasn't present? And that becomes really, really important for auditing, for surveys, to be able to really clearly distinguish between when someone forgot to document or that information is missing versus when my individual wasn't there. So this is an example of, two fields that I strongly encourage including in every single scoring method. But I also, depending on the individual and what you're looking to track, can get very, very prescriptive about exactly how many prompts did they need, exactly how many gestures did they need, exactly how many times did you have to do total assist versus hand over hand. And we can track progression, because for some of our individuals, depending on their ability, the goal might not be to get them to do something independently. It might be to get them to do it with fewer and fewer prompts over time. So if we have a quantitative value in here, as our staff are documenting and we're building this data, we can see that they're moving from 3 prompts to 2 prompts to a gesture. And for this person, that means that they've met their goal. So that is something to consider. Another scoring method option, and I'm just going to switch into a different browser just to show what that looks like, is using your drop downs. Oh, wrong program. Let's go back. Let's start with this one, and then we'll go back and talk about behaviors. But if for those of you who are using ISP programs to track individual responses to not just, again, goals and services, but things like fire drills, you can set up detailed scoring methods that allow you to track, did your individual respond? If they responded, was it met? In this case, evacuating within 3 minutes. Was it not met? They evacuated, but it took them longer? Did they not evacuate? Did they need assistance? Did they respond? So this is just another example of how you might look at that information if you're tracking something like drills. Another one is behaviors, where we set up the ISP program, and in our ISP program, we are detailing what the target behaviors for that particular individual is. So it will be unique to that person, whether it's anxiety or aggression or self-injurious behaviors, and we give a description of what that looks like. And then using our scoring method, we are listing interventions that our staff might use. And when we get into BI in just a little bit here, we'll be able to track how many times that our staff use a recommended intervention versus a discouraged one. So some of you who've been with us for a little while, that might sound familiar. That's what was going on in the behavior event record module. And we're duplicating that here in ISB programs with the added bonus of better reporting and, of course, BI. Any questions with those examples before we hop into the dashboard? Okay, so for those of you who have BI, in order to hop over into the dashboard, you're going to want to go over to the business intelligence. Actually, we're going to go into BI from here. So that's going to open in a separate window. It is a single sign-on. If you sign out of BI, you'll also be signed out of Therap. So I'm going to come up in here. I'm going to pull up my DDO dashboard. We'll start to look at some of that information and see how that's related. Just realized that I didn't show you the mapping for the outcome measure types. I apologize. So let's see how that ties into BI before we actually hop into the dashboard. So here we go. Once you've created your outcome measure type, which is those buckets that you're dropping your different outcomes and tasks into. So here's an example of one that I've created. Okay. In my task domains, what I'm doing is I'm highlighting the different categories that my ISV program tasks might fall under. We have unique individuals, they have unique language in each of their tasks, but usually we can identify some common denominators. Large swaths of our folks are working on hygiene-related goals or finance-related goals or self-sufficiency or whatever the case may be. And I'm going to outline those possible categories and list them out as my task domains. In my score labels, this is where I'm going to link that to my existing scoring method. And based on the information that I'm trying to get out of BI, I'm going to indicate what it is that I want to see. For example, if I'm tracking, are my individuals meeting their targets, then I might have some examples that say something along the lines of the target has been met, the individual is working towards the goal, or they're not making progress. So this is the outcome measure type that I'm using for the example that I'm going to show you guys in business intelligence. For each individual, I'm going to go ahead and map that over. I've gone through and I've mapped this out already, so you'll see the results that I've entered. Okay. And you can see what I've done is I have the tasks here. And then for each task, I'm indicating which of those categories or domains that it falls under. So brushing his teeth might be health and hygiene. Washing his hair might be health and self-sufficiency. So I'm coming in here and I'm pairing for each unique individual which task domains their task descriptions fall under. I'm doing the same thing down here in the scoring method. So when William scores independent, or staff go in and document that he has that he performed that particular task or function independently, then BI recognizes that as William meeting his target. If he needed a gestural prompt, then he's still working towards his goal. And you can go in again for each person and link those over. Okay, so that's that mapping or that linking process that we often talk about as part of setting up DDO. When that's all done, then you can hop over to the dashboard and start to analyze some of that data. So let's go in here and let's adjust our date range. And let's bring this out a little further. Select our outcome measure and apply. Okay, so when we come in here, you can see that for this goal progress outcome measure, which I just shared with you guys, we have data across 2 programs. So we've got it in our personal care home, we've got it in our Main Street home. System shows how many ISP programs are participating, how many individuals, this is based on in comparison to the enrolled individuals for that particular program, and then how many values we have. Now, over on this side, where it says target met, working towards goal, not making progress, those are the score labels that I created. So based on what it is that you're trying to get out of the system and what you're indicating in those score labels, that's what's represented here. So I can see, just sort of right off the top, before I drill down into any of this information, that the individuals in this population are meeting their target in my personal care home about 62% of the time, whereas my individuals in Main Street home are not, or rather are a little bit lower at about 56%. If I click on the provider program, I can come in here and I can see that breakdown. Which of my individuals are contributing to those values? So I have one individual here, and because it's just him, he's contributing to all of that. But if I go back and I choose my Main Street home where I've got multiple individuals, thinking, I can see that of that total, William is meeting his goal 68% of the time versus 47% of the time. So you can see this on a programmatic level. You can break this down by program type. You can see it on an individual level. And if you wanted to take that a step further, you can also look at it on a per employee or per user basis as well. We need to go back in here. And let's move this over just a little bit. Okay. So we can see per individual, we've got 3 of them that have data collection, which employees are recording that data, and then how well they're doing with each one of them. So I can see that in general, when Ebony is working with Jane on her goal progress, that she's doing almost twice as well with Ebony than she is with Fayon. And I can even go in across the board on this side here and look for all of the individuals that Ebony works with. How often are the individuals making progress? And it looks like, you know, again, on this end, when Ebony works with the 3 individuals that are listed here, 70% of the time they meet their goal, whereas with FAM, they're only meeting their goal 50% of the time. And this is information that you can use when you're preparing for scheduling. This is information that you can use when you're doing annual evaluations, when you're trying to determine who needs retraining. You can also use this to determine, do my individuals do better at day program versus residential? Is this a time of the day issue? So there's lots of information that you can get out of BI, all of this because of the way that you structured your ISP program scoring method. For those of you who might not have been in the dashboards before, just so you know, you can always export this information so that if you needed to include it in reports or for grants, you can do that. And you can also change the format that the information is presented in as well. So you can see it by service provider or looking at it bar charts. Okay. You can also do pie charts. So lots of different ways that you can look at this same information, all based on the way that your ISP program scoring method and subsequently your outcome measure type was written. I'll show you another example. Switch to a different provider. Ooh, wrong dashboard. There we go. So we're going to look at some examples of a behavior outcome measure type that we did. Okay, so with the behavior outcome measure, what we did was we took the ISP program that I previously showed you, and for our scoring method labels, we used encouraged, discouraged, and neutral. So what we did was we mapped the different interventions. For example, if staff offered redirection, we might have said that for this particular individual, that's encouraged. If staff did some planned ignoring, for this particular individual, that might have been discouraged. But ultimately, what we can get at when we get here in BI is when we're looking in aggregate at our programs and our services, how often are our staff using encouraged interventions when someone has a behavior? How often are they using discouraged ones? And then we can look at that on a individual service provider level to again determine, do our folks need some retraining? Do we need to talk to Fayon and let her know, 90% of the time here, in this case, she's doing an encouraged behavior, but if it was the inverse, she was using a discouraged one, we need to retrain her about how to work with this individual when they're having a behavior or when they're having a difficult time. All of this made possible by your scoring methods. Any questions about how that information translates in the system? Before we wrap up today, I want to take the opportunity to sort of open up the floor so that you guys can ask questions and we can have a little bit of a discussion. In order to ask your questions, feel free to go ahead and raise your hand. As you all raise your hands, we'll go ahead and unmute you so that you can ask any questions that you might have. I thought I saw a hand there. There we go. Okay, Justina, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. You are unmuted.
Actually, I just typed my question in now. We just wanted to know if you could show us how those weighted scores worked on that BI dashboard.
Which
there was a tab next to the service provider.
I gotcha. So with the weighted possibility, and I'm just going to go ahead and read the feedback. But with the weighted scores, what you're able to do is come into the system and assign an ISP program weight to your services. What this means, if you have a goal that data is once a day, 5 days a week, it's a day program, Monday through Friday, this individual goes in and they're collecting data. And you have another goal that's only run once a week. When you look at the information in BI, you have 5 times as much data in one program than you have the other, but they should carry the same weight, okay? So the way that you're able to come in here is you can come in, click on the tab that says Manage ISP Program Weights, and then for a goal where data is collected every day, 5 days a week for a day program, I might set that ISP program to 1. But for one that's collected once a week, I might set that to 5, so that the system recognizes for every one entry that we have for this program, it's the equivalent of 5 entries for another. That's how that ISP program weights section works. Did I answer your question? All right, awesome. Okay. Did we have any other questions? Let's see.
Fayon, could you speak for just a second? We had there was a question a few minutes ago around whether or not BI and DDO allows you to automatically pull or push reports, and I explained through the chat box that it doesn't automatically pull reports, but that you can set default views through your customizations so that it will automatically, when you view the dashboard, it will have the filters and parameters that you want. So if you could show that, that may be helpful.
Absolutely. So when you come in here, there are sort of some default dates that BI will open up to. But if you want to look at, or rather view your information, filter it through a certain lens, if you will, what you do when you sign into the system is you can come in and set those customizations up. And from here, once you have saved or rather you set it up and you save that customization, next time you sign into the system, you can simply apply it without having to go through and add all of those filters. Okay, so if I've got this set up this way, I can save that customization, I can add it, give it a name, or monthly report. I can make it my default so that the next time, and I'm going to just close this tab so that I can hop back in. The next time I come into BI, since I've set that as my default, anytime that I'm on that tab, it will switch over to that customization. But if I've got more than one, I can also apply any of the others that I've created. So I can come in here, I can apply a customization and a list will show up and I can choose which one I want and all of those filters will be applied. Any other questions about the customizations? Were there any other questions in the chat?
I think we've addressed all of them. I know several folks have asked, so I'll just reiterate to the whole group that we have been recording this webinar and we'll be posting it on our homepage. Faye, do you want to open up our homepage real fast and show? It will take us a minute. Once we finish these up, we have to convert it into a postable file type. But as soon as we get that converted, we will get it posted on our homepage, which Faye is pulling up right now. Right in the middle of our homepage on our top banner, you'll see a list of webinars. You can see right there where Faye has it. If you click on webinars, which that may be where many of you guys went to register for this, but it will show you about upcoming webinars that we have right up here at the top. But if you scroll all the way down, you will see recorded webinars that you can watch. And so it will be posted there. My guess is it should be there either by the beginning of the week or sometime early next week. We should have it up.
All right.
Any other thoughts, questions from anyone? All right. Well, again, we really appreciate y'all's time this afternoon. I hope this was helpful and useful in thinking about how you're utilizing your scoring methods, both at the individual level through ISP programs and data, as well as for those of you that are taking on DDO and trying to look at data across the board. Please keep an eye out. We're continuing to do DDO-related webinars and just data-related webinars every few weeks. So we're going to try to get a few more scheduled here over the next several weeks, and we're also going to be hopefully incorporating some webinars from some of our users, some folks that have been out there and have utilized the DDO platform for a while, so that they can share their experience and some of the things that they're doing. So certainly keep an eye out for that over the coming weeks and months. So if we don't have any other questions, again, we really appreciate it, and we will let you guys go and talk to you soon. Thanks, everyone.